In our union, we've adopted a slogan.
This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and I'm with David Van Deusen, who is the president of the Vermont AFL-CIO. And this AFL-CIO has been quite active, taking up a number of issues of struggle. We're coming up on May Day. So David, why don't you talk about the issues that confront your labor movement in Vermont, but also the labor movement as a whole in the United States?
Pleasure to be with you here today, Steve. Look, nationally, labor has been on decline for decades. There's no mystery about that. Our numbers are down, our power and our influence are down. We have a little more foothold into the halls of power with the change of administrations this past January, but only a little. Let's not kid ourselves. The PRO Act, we are still 3 Democrats away from even having a majority in the Senate to even have a shot at passing that. And those aren't Republicans that are the problem right now. Those are 3 Democrats that have been signed on. So we've married ourselves to a Democratic Party, which largely does not support us on our major issues. So our challenges are many. We do need to do whatever we can to pass the PRO Act. That would be huge. But still, we can't put all of our eggs in the basket of passing legislation with 2 parties that generally don't share our view of the world. So we also need to fight for not just Biden's recovery plan, which is a good first start, but we need to fight for a union-led Green New Deal. We need to go further. We need to pass social benefits that take care of working people, be it through their health care provided by the state, or be it through paid family medical leave. We need to go so much further, and the pandemic has showed us the weakness of our social system. But we're not going to get these things by having a bunch of people with suits on in Washington, D.C. having meetings at the White House. That's not how we build power. We build power by building solidarity on the shop floor, in the factory, on the job sites. And then we network with other locals, with other unions, and we build the power on the streets. The politicians will follow if they're forced to. They're not going to do it through polite discussions and polite lobbying efforts.
And one of the big battles was the Amazon Bessemer workers. What are some of the lessons of that fight, and what the AFL-CIO could have done and labored nationally to support these workers?
Look, I don't want to try to disparage the hard work that was done around that campaign. That loss hurts. But look, as Jane McAlevey has said, there are no shortcuts to building power. So we need to do a better job, not just with our social media, not just with sending organizers in to do blitzes. We need to be meticulous about it. And we need to, as workers, build those relationships, one worker at a time, that will be required to have the solidarity needed to be able to resist the inevitable attack from the bosses when they know, when they can sense that the union is nearing fruition. And that's what we saw there. We saw a majority of workers sign up, and then through a massive anti-union campaign, that people were scared. And people do get scared. We're human beings. I understand that. So that's another good argument for passing things like the PRO Act. This is why we should have card check for all workers in the United States of America, where a majority of people sign a union card. The union is recognized that day. We can't play the shell game. We can't play the game anymore of following the rules and then letting the bosses have time to figure out how to scare us, how to turn us against each other, and how to get us away from our own self-interest.
But is the card check in the PRO Act?
There's a lot of aspects of the PRO Act which are great. No, I don't believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the kind of steps we need to be taking. We need to go beyond it. But the reality is we first have to build our power in order to do it. So let's not forget too, that with an unfair union election process, when folks are trying to form a union through the NLRB, let's not forget back in the day, our grandparents, they struck. They went on strike for recognition. They did what it took to get the bosses to have no choice but to recognize them and to become political powers in their areas, in their factories, in their workspaces. We need to get back to the basics. We need to get back to those things which built the labor movement in the first place, not always play by the game of those politicians that have an interest in us losing.
You came into office in the Vermont AFL-CIO with an idea of transformation of the Vermont AFL-CIO and rebuilding the labor movement. What's your vision? You're talking about it now of how the labor movement is going to be rebuilt.
You could take what we did as a small step in a direction. Here in Vermont, the first thing we did when we took office, the United Slate, is we took money out of what we traditionally would pay lobbyists for. We saw that, this has not been bearing fruit, and we put it towards an organizing department. So now we have on-call organizers that we could assign to affiliates and to groups of workers who aren't yet unionized to help them organize. We have an assigned organizer right now working with United Academics and AFT local to fight back at UVM against program and job cuts. This was something that we couldn't do before when we had all of our resources, or many of our resources, into lobbying. We have another organizer right now working to organize a new group of workers, which I'm not at liberty to discuss right now because the boss doesn't know yet. But if the national AFL-CIO was to take even a modest fraction of the incredible amount of money they spend to back the Democratic Party, and instead putting in organizing, we would get actual bang for our buck, as opposed to just disappointments after our party wins the election and yet still are incapable or unwilling to deliver on the promises that they ran on.
And this last election, your council, your state federation, as well as councils in Southwest Wisconsin, Rochester, the MLK, were very concerned about the danger of an insurrection, of a fascist coup. Why don't you talk about your concerns about the rise of fascist movements and what that means for the labor movement?
Our concerns were well-founded. January 6th was an insurrection. People died. There was violence in the streets and a takeover of the Capitol building. We teetered on the brink of losing those vestiges of democracy that we have today. That was a dangerous time, and that time is not over. Let's not think that the far right from the Republican Party and neo-fascists have packed it in. They're still there and they're still organizing. So fascism is not just on the rise, but it is spite. And we had a president, Donald Trump, in power, who was acting as the spearhead for a fascist transformation of society, an undemocratic president for life type of situation. These are serious dangers, but here's how we beat it. Two ways: direct confrontation. In my belief, you can never allow the fascists to have the streets. You can never allow them to control the public discourse. I believe that fascists must be directly confronted, just as our grandfathers did in World War II. We have to do this here at home, if that's what it takes. But also, we beat it through social justice unionism. Now, folks that are going to be attracted to something other than the mainstream often are going to be disaffected folks without a lot of hope. So what the labor movement has to do, the responsibility we have to history, is to create not just a strong movement to protect the more narrow self-interest of our members. We have to do that, but we have to go beyond that into social justice unionism, whereby the labor movement acts as the force fighting for the common good of all working people. And if we can create a truly independent, strong, mobilized pole within the political spectrum, one that is independent from the Democratic Party, one that is independent from the more mainstream capitalist forces in the United States, then naturally working people are going to be attracted to that. And you know who is the great majority of people in this country and in every country? It is working people. But we need to be shown to be standing up, taking risks and challenges, and doing what needs to be done to stand up for the working people if we're going to expect other working people to rally to our cause.
Pandemic hopefully is in decline in the United States. We don't know, and it's exposed the serious failures of the structure of this system: privatized healthcare, privatized a system of deregulation. When the pandemic goes away, and hopefully it will, the same structure is still here that has made the rich richer, the very rich very richer, and basically pauperized working people. Millions of working people have lost their jobs and face a dire situation, even if the pandemic declines.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. And again, the lessons to be learned of the pandemic is the weakness of our social system in this country and others. If we would have had a rational national healthcare system with universal coverage, we would have been so much better positioned, not just during the darkest hours of the pandemic, but for the distribution of the vaccines. We could be further along today. If we had paid family medical leave, if we had adequate mandated paid sick leave for everybody, we would not have had to scramble during the pandemic to try to claw those things into various workplaces. And mind you, we're still fighting within cities, within employers, within unions to maintain those things. Hopefully now that we're on the back end of the COVID cliff. But we need a robust social system. It can't just be about having a political voice and having a good contract. It has to be bigger than that. Working people, who are the 99% of the people in this country, need to reap 99% of the benefits that the wealthiest country on earth creates. And we're not in that situation yet. And while we have learned that lesson, while working people, many of them have learned this lesson of the weakness of our system, the need for change, it's clear as day to me that huge aspects of both the Republican and Democratic parties have not learned those lessons. Thus, we don't even have all the Democrats back in the PRO Act in Washington, D.C. Here in Vermont, they've tinkered around the edges. The Democratic Party, which is massively the biggest party in the state, with the Republicans and the Progressive Party being smaller, they refuse to advance basic things like card check for public sector workers. It's absolutely incredible. They say it's not a COVID issue, right, is one of the things they say. But the fact is, during COVID, we would get calls on a weekly basis from non-unionized workers who are being forced to work without PPE in unsafe working conditions, piled into trucks, worried about dying or bringing disease back to their families, and they did not have a rapid and fair means to unionize. They were scared to go through the VLRB, our labor board process for recognition, public sector workers, because of the retaliation that they expected from the boss and the intern. So if we would have had card check then, dozens of workplaces right here in Vermont would have been unionized right now as a result of the pandemic. And I guarantee you, thousands of times over, that has played itself out across the United States and millions of times over around the world since this time last year.
And there is growing strike wave in the United States. Workers are very angry about the attacks that they're facing in the midst of this COVID and the disparity of wealth. The billionaires like Bezos, worth nearly $200 billion, when his workers are making $15 and suffering very difficult conditions on the factory floor. But let's get back. So you raised this issue of the general strike, you and these other councils. What was the response of the national AFL-CIO?
It wasn't just 11 of us on the executive board making that motion. We passed an authorization at our convention. The delegates did. 87% of our delegates, after an hour-long debate, authorized us to call for a general strike in the event of a fascist coup in this country. It was the right thing to do. We make zero apologies. That was absolutely what we should have been doing everywhere in this country during those dark, dangerous times. National AFL-CIO seems to see it a little differently, Steve. About a month ago, we got a letter from Richard Trumka, national president of AFL-CIO, announcing that he was going to start an investigation against us for misconduct as a result of daring to have that vote. Think about that. Our republic faced an end to democracy. We took the very modest step of having our rank and file democratically vote to empower us to call for a general strike in the event of a coup. And the response of Richard Trumka is to launch a retaliatory investigation against the 10,000 member Vermont AFL-CIO for misconduct. Let that sink in. Over the last week, we've had half a dozen of our officers contacted by the National AFL-CIO with a request to conduct investigation interviews. So we are aiming not to be distracted by this. We have serious work to do here in Vermont, trying to build support for a Green New Deal, mobilizing for a mass May Day rally in support of all workers in our state. We have so much work to do. We have organizing campaigns going on. And the last thing we want to do is be distracted by this kind of retaliatory action from Washington, D.C. But it is ironic that as we sought to defend our own democracy, God forbid union people in the AFL-CIO dared to exercise democracy of their own. So I think that that's a statement not just about the state of a republic and how precious and precarious the democracy we have may be, but also a statement about the lack of internal democracy within the labor movement itself, specifically within the AFL-CIO. But look, that doesn't mean we turn our back on the AFL-CIO. We are committed and we believe that this is a vehicle for change. So we've been reaching out to locals all across the country right now, central labor councils, different state federations, to talk about building a united, that's our caucus here in Vermont, but something like a united progressive caucus within the national AFL-CIO, so that when we have an election in a year from now, we can elect a slate of folks that share our commitment to building true union democracy within the AFL, to committing ourselves to social justice unionism, and to making those connections within communities that are necessary to build real power, and to take some tens of millions of dollars out of handing it over to the Democratic Party, which has let us down, and putting it into our various organizing departments to help us grow our numbers as organized labor.
And you see the idea of a slate within the AFL-CIO, or a caucus, or a current in the AFL-CIO, saying there have to be some changes as far as the structure and the organization of the AFL-CIO and the direction of the AFL-CIO.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't just need new voices. We need a new commitment to action. We need a new commitment to democracy. And we need a new commitment to being in solidarity with the full working class in this country.
And how can people get involved in that?
Listen, they're welcome to reach out to the Vermont AFL-CIO. Our executive vice president, Tristan Nadee, right now is taking the lead with a lot of the outreach to different federations and labor councils across the country. If they look at our webpage and contact us, either myself or Tristan or one of our other officers will be happy to get in touch with you. And we'd like to have that conversation about how we build real change and take a true left turn within the national AFL-CIO.
And this issue of the media, because of course the corporate media have their own agenda, and they certainly don't want all the workers in this country organized and politically aware of the issues. Why isn't there a channel, a national labor channel for working people by the AFL-CIO and other unions, so you can get live coverage of the struggles going on around this country, tying all these struggles together?
Because I'll tell you why. It's quite simple. It's because we're committed to giving wheelbarrows full of money to a Democratic Party that can't deliver real victories for the working class. So if you were to change your priorities, that could easily be achieved. I mean, this is an organization of millions of people. We are a sleeping giant, and we have the ability, if we so choose, if we will it, to be the strongest force in the United States of America. But there needs to be the will there, and we have to cut the cord to parties which do not adequately represent our interests.
So we're coming up on May Day. You are confident, you're optimistic that things are changing in the labor movement, that the working class is going to become revitalized and build a organization, a movement that can organize everyone in the United States?
Absolutely. I'm absolutely optimistic. I mean, here in Vermont, for example, on May Day, we're going to be marching side by side with groups like Migrant Justice, 350 Vermont, the United Electrical Workers, VSCA, DSA, a true cross section of the people of this state. And we are not interested in anything less than real solidarity on our different issues. And specifically, we're going to be calling for not only the passage of the PRO Act, but things like car check that potentially could help us build our power here in Vermont. But I am absolutely optimistic. I know we're going to turn that corner, and I'm looking forward to building that national progressive caucus that will change the national AFL-CIO from within.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us on WorkWeek, And we've been talking with David Van Deusen. He's the president of the Vermont AFL-CIO. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Steve. Thank you.